Hey, so we're back. We're going to be looking at an index fund. And so what we're looking at today is going to be XLE. XLE is a spider fund, SPDR. They do index funds like what we're going to be looking at. And so this one is focused around the energy sector. And so before we get into it, this is the top holdings in this index fund. So you can see it's primarily revolving around Exxon and Chevron, and then we have all these other smaller proportional companies. So you can see Exxon's 23% of this fund, Chevron's another 20%, and then as we go down the list, it just gets smaller. Those are the primary holdings. Everything else is less than 5%. And so the reason why we're kind of that I want to track some of these is to find a index like this. And I'm saying this one in particular because clearly we can see it's been in a strong uptrend for the past 2 years, a little over 2 years at this point. And so we want to try to find an index where it might be down here in a low point, and if we can kind of find that one, see that it's kind of rising. So for this one, obviously it's very unlikely that we're going to time it perfectly where we can see the absolute bottom and then ride it all the way up. But what I'm hoping for is, like, worst case scenario, we can kind of see, maybe like here-ish, like in the middle of the chart, like third quarter 21, we can see that it's clearly in an uptrend at that point for about close to a year, and we would buy at some point right around here and then just watch it continue to rise up. That's kind of the goal in following indexes. And just to add a little more depth to it, so we have this index section laid out here, and these are going to be all the indexes we're going to follow. So I'm probably just going to go down the list over the course of multiple videos and track each one of these sectors. And the thinking is, if we can catch a index fund like XLE, we can not only invest in that index just to get a very conservative approach to that market, but we could also take it to the next step and maybe pick Exxon and track it as it goes up, because chances are if you can find an index that's growing rapidly like XLE, you can then almost double down on it, choose one of these smaller ones like maybe Phillips, and see it's most likely also going in that upward trend. But the added risk is, because it's just one company, your risk obviously is going up, but also the profit should go up. We're not going to dig into that. I know I follow Exxon to a degree, but the thinking is if the index goes up, say 10%, maybe one of those other companies within the index might be one of the ones that's surging even further. So if the index, say, doubles over the course of 2 years, if we can pick one of the companies, preferably one of the mid to smaller companies, maybe that company is going to 3 or 4x in that same period of time, and it just doesn't get the credit it's due because it's not allocating the same weight as it is to an Exxon. But that's kind of the thinking. So before we get into it, if you have any opinions on the energy sector, uh, preferably and specifically in XLE, but just the energy sector as a whole, I'd be very interested in hearing that. So please share your opinions in the comments below. But with that said, let's take a look. So we're just going to do a very basic thing that we've been doing with all the other individual stocks and our index types funds. So what we're doing here just initially is we're going to just draw out a couple lines just to see where the bottom is, where the top is. So we have the bottom right around 21. We have a peak around 93. I'm not sure at this point if it's kind of maxed out. It doesn't seem like it wants to go higher. It tested that point once back in November, came very close again in January, and now it seems to be slowing down. So I don't know if we've hit the peak in energy sector, and maybe the move for this would be to sell or short it because it's likely to pull back. We can kind of see if it kind of goes in cycles. It seems actually to kind of go relatively flat. I mean, right now we're on 2016, and it looks like over this 3 year period, it went from a low of like 35, it rose up to close to 60, came back down, up, down, all the way back down to like 44. Um, yeah, we're just going to try to see if, especially if an index has cycles, which this one kind of seems to be doing that, we can actually expand this into years just to, maybe quarters is better. I mean, you can kind of see it has a peak in '08, again in 14, and right now we're in 23. So it's, at a very brief basis, we go from 8 to 14, so that's 6 years. So would we see one in 2020? Uh, in this case, no, but just 2 years later, it does rise up. So it went 6 years and then 8 years. Is there a pattern that's going to happen where now all of a sudden it does pull back, sort of like it did in the past? I'm kind of leaning towards yes, that we could see very dramatic falls in the coming maybe year, where it pulls back, say, like 50% or more. This peak back in 14 was at 70, all the way down to about 43, 44. So that's a near half. We could experience that in the coming few quarters, if not the next year and a half to maybe 2 years. So that's kind of the ideology that we're kind of doing with this. So let's just focus back in on what we're currently doing, looking at the past 3 years, seeing what's going on. So for this one, we don't often do this, but I will be doing it for this one, where we're going to just draw in a trend line. Whoop. Let me just make that a little bit more in sync. So it looks like right around, and I'm trying to draw it out just a little bit further than where it currently is, so we can kind of capture just the weeks ahead, possibly months ahead is optimal. And we're going to make that purple. We'll draw in one more trend line to kind of see the tops, and we'll just take this point and whoop, and if we just kind of capture maybe like here-ish, it's not letting me. I'm trying to zoom out a little bit more. It doesn't really want me to go higher, but I feel like that's a decent spot. So we'll zoom back in. So you can see anytime it exceeded that purple line, that'd be a good time to sell, or even touch that line, that'd be a time to kind of sell the rip and then buy the dip. Again, I don't really advise on that type of strategy necessarily, especially in an uptrend. Normally, what I would like to do is accumulate it more on the dips, let it continue to rise, and that way you can kind of build out a great position in a company like this. So you could have had, one huge time to buy, two, three, four times to buy, and right now we're kind of in the middle. And again, I realize those lines aren't perfectly parallel, but they're very close. If anything, it kind of widens towards the end to the more recent times. But right now we're locked in, and so right now the thinking is, will this one come back to our lower trend line and then continue to rise up, or did it kind of hit its peak and now it's going to start falling downwards? Right now I'm more inclined to think it's going to start falling downwards, but only time will tell. So we will try our best to kind of incorporate some other lines that we kind of find, in terms of like a buy or sell point. Um, so the green line is going to be our buy point. I feel like you could probably draw it in around here, around 43. And again, for a stock like this, it's probably more beneficial to stick to the trend lines as opposed to uh, the, the green and red lines in terms of buying and selling. But we're just going to kind of draw them out to see just what makes the most sense. Um, Honestly, for this one I might just kind of duplicate the black because again, it seems like it's near the peak. And so if we just kind of stick with that, and then if I were to draw in one more, like a fair value line, it seems like there was some resistance right around like here, but also maybe here in the more recent. So maybe I might just do almost like a box around. So we'll make this blue so we can see, and we'll add in another one because this one is kind of unique where hopefully this isn't too scattered for all of us here. So I'll actually zoom in a little bit just so hopefully it's a little more clear, and hopefully the colors aren't like too confusing. Um, but yeah, so right now I would say like in between the blue box, especially as we look at the most recent time period, past year roughly, that seems to be like the fair value range. If you can catch it below that, you're starting to get closer to a good buy point. Above that, it's uh, arguable arguable if it's a good time. But overall, if we follow the purple trend lines, the first time I would consider buying this, especially this week because we're in midweek, if it fell down to about $80, that would be like a time where I'd consider it. The thing is, if it went severely below, like all the way down to like 72 or even 70, or maybe since we have the blue line, if it went all the way down to 67 and hit the bottom, I mean, clearly we broke that trend line. And you have to imagine it's now in that point where it's just going to start falling and falling fast. So if that were to be the case, you would want to get rid of that position because it's going to continue to fall, and we'd want to flip the roll from a buy position to a short position. Right now, I'm probably not going to add anything, but I will add this to our chart here. So just bear with me as I update this. So currently it's at 85. A buy point for me would be 43. A sell point would be 91. And I guess, again, sticking to the trend line, the first time I actually would consider buying this is maybe at about 80. So I will update it to show that because, again, we're in that zone, and we want to see, is it going to continue to climb, or has it reached its limits? So I'll move this over to show just where we're at, and I'm going to unhighlight this. So we have XLE, the energy sector, right here. It seems like it's right in the middle. I don't think it's a good time to buy or sell it. It's just give it a little more time. If it hits 91 again, I think that's a time to potentially sell or short the stock because, again, it's hit that mark a couple times now in the past like 3 to 4 months, and it doesn't seem to want to go above. So that seems to be the limit on this stock. Time will tell, of course, but that's how I'm seeing it today. By all means, let me know your opinions in the stock in the comments below, and please like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.